Hi, this is JP Morgan.
And this is Kenneth Merrill. And today we have with us the beautiful Paloma Favi.
Hi.
She's going to help us take a look at the GH5s.
And the GH5 OG.
Which we have to say thank you to Borrow Lenses, who have sent us the cameras and the lenses so we can compare them. It's a great place to get equipment, to test it out, to get a second camera, a second lens, or a lens you want to use for a particular occasion or something that's going on.
And
great place to go.
They ship anywhere. So if you don't live in Los Angeles like we do and you don't have any rental houses around, hit up Borrow Lenses. They have tons of gear on there. I've used them several times.
So thanks to Borrow Lenses. So let's take a look at these two cameras. What do you think?
I like the GH5s because it's kind of like a cinema camera packed into a little GH5 body. I mean, not only does it have the 400 megabit per second codec, but it comes with Vlog already. You don't have to pay extra for it. It also has incredible low light, I hear, and it has a 10 megapixel sensor, which means theoretically it should have better dynamic range and be more sharp.
Anytime you put the S on the end of anything, Sony has kind of trained us that means it's a low light camera. You know, and that's exactly what this is. A 10 megapixel sensor means it's going to be really good in low light. It is stripped down. It doesn't have image stabilization, which is interesting. You know, so we'll look at that. We definitely want to look at the slow motion, and we want to look at just the other features as far as dynamic range and how that sensor handles that, and go from there.
So let's do it.
All right. So we're about to do our slow motion shots. So Emerald's idea was that we take our little portable hair blower here and we just blow slow motion with her hair flying in the wind. It'll look epic. So right now Ken is shooting the stabilization test, GH5s. So it doesn't have stabilization. So we're gonna look at how that looks compared to the GH5, which has stabilization. That stabilization on the GH5 is pretty nice. You can feel it. It just kind of floats. So we'll look at those two. We know that the GH5s is not going to have the same, but just see what it looks like. So we just got back in from testing the GH5 and the GH5s. I mean, we just walked in this very second.
Barely.
And
threw the footage on, hit review filter, and
it's all there. No, actually, Kenneth took all kinds of time to process everything and to grade everything, and
yeah.
And so here we are.
Not enough time, I don't think, but
could have used a little more time.
Obviously. Anyways, let's jump into it. So let's talk about dynamic range first.
Okay.
How do we set this up?
Well, we set it up in an alley. We've got a really bright wall on the side. It's got a direct sunlight, direct heavy sunlight, deep shadow on the right-hand side, and then we're looking into white clouds out in the background.
And we exposed for her face. So the idea here is if you're shooting outside, can you find some shade, shoot in the shade, and still retain some of the sunny highlights in the background?
Which it's doing a great job of, actually. I mean, if you look at that car driving by right there, was super bright. You know, I mean...
And they look okay.
They do. They do.
The brick and everything looks awesome. Even when you kind of bump the exposure. So we started to ramp up just to see where does each camera break, you know? As you bump the exposure one stop, it's not too bad, but then you get to like 2 stops and they both just start breaking immediately.
Yeah.
She still looks fine because she's only a couple stops over, but everything else falls
The background's
apart really
pretty much
fast.
gone. By 3 stops, the background's gone.
It's kind of what you would expect given the situation, but the fact that they're doing it at the same time is interesting because it's telling me that the dynamic range on both these cameras is kind of similar in the highlights, at least.
Very similar in the highlights, yep. So it's interesting to me that GH5 is cropping way more than the GH5s. So same lens, 25 millimeter, so equivalent of a 50 millimeter, and it's the GH5 is much tighter crop than the GH5s, and so it's noticeably different.
Yeah, I like the GH5s better for that reason. It
gives you a little broader.
Yeah, a little bit more space. So we go down in the underexposure range, and this is where I think you start to see the real differences between them because the GH5 starts to get green a lot more. The GH5s seems to hold to the more natural colors. But if you look at the brick, like on the right side, here at -3, the brick is super green.
Very green.
And then it's hard to see, but the noise is like a lot more gritty in the GH5, which is what you would expect. But at the same time, they both kind of get really noisy at the same point. So I would say in terms of dynamic range, they probably have roughly the same, but maybe the GH5s does hold the color a little bit better and the grain is a little finer. So what everyone's talking about with this GH5s is the low light. Now we started at 400 ISO, which is the native for both of these cameras. The GH5 is a little out of focus. I think I catch that here at 1600 where I refocus it. They both look really good at these ISO values. I would say the GH5, you start to see the noise at 1600.
The GH5 starts to show, yeah, at 1600.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's good up to 1600. It's usable up to 1600.
I'd be okay. Yeah, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah.
3200 though, it starts to get really noticeable. Kind of reminds me of my like Canon days.
It starts to dance in the blacks there, pretty good. But the GH5s still looks pretty good.
Yeah, it's really good. You do start to see it. It's almost like it's a stop behind the GH5.
It feels like it's a stop behind.
Which is kind of what I've been hearing. I guess that's to be expected.
So you feel like on the GH5, we could go up to 1600, but you could go up to 3200 on a GH5s.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you get to 6400, my sense about these kinds of things is, okay, yeah, you can get to 6400, but...
The thing that kind of bugs me about this one, though, is that the image starts to get really soft because it's trying to denoise it. And I feel like this is a lot softer than I've seen in other cameras when I've pushed them to similar levels.
Like 12,800, she looks like she has a soft focus filter on her face.
Granted, it's cleaner than a lot of 12,800s I've seen, but the trade-off is that it's really soft. So I don't know that...
It's kind of a pretty look in its own way.
If you're shooting Hollywood, old Hollywood look. I don't know. Does it perform better than GH5? Absolutely, I'd say by at least a stop, maybe stop and a half. So if you're considering between the two and you really shoot a lot of low light stuff, the S might be the thing to go to. But compared to some of the other low light beasts we've used, like the A7S II, I don't know that it's a ton better than that.
I don't know that it's better, no. I mean, we'd have to compare that to really say.
Yeah, it's hard because we don't have it side by side.
Yeah.
But. All right, so the other thing, image stabilization.
I mean, I can look at this. I don't have to look at it. It's so obvious that's a GH5.
Yeah.
And there's just a softness to it,
It's almost like you're a bad Steadicam operator.
Yes.
That's what it looks like. Like it's pretty smooth. Pretty smooth. A few little jarring things. I'm walking backwards here. You can kind of feel the sensor pushing around a little bit. That's the downside of the stabilization, is sometimes it'll almost like reframe for you a little. But you compare it to the S and it's
GH5S.
like you feel everything.
We're on a horse. At a gallop. I'm on a horse.
This looks a lot more like you would expect with a DSLR.
That image stabilization is really...
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal because you are getting a much smoother... If you're running and gunning and using this thing handheld at all, the GH5S is probably not your choice.
Yeah, I gotta say that. You were saying before, like the S is kind of geared more toward the cinema crowd.
It is.
And the cinema crowd doesn't have image sensor stabilization.
They're on gimbals, they're on sliders.
Or you have like real rigging and stuff, so
yeah.
I get that. But in terms of just using this tiny little body by itself without any extra things, that GH5 still has that advantage with the IBIS.
Okay. So now let's look at our now famous slow motion test, which is the leaf blower fan on model's face.
I love how you can see the leaf blower in the bottom side of frame.
Sliding in.
So this is 60 frames in 1080 8-bit. We just were comparing the motion. So like 60 to 100 is a pretty big jump. And most cameras these days seem to be shooting 120 frames.
In 1080p, yeah.
In 1080p.
That's the new norm.
I will say this 120 doesn't look amazing. It kind of looks like the 120 I've seen from others.
Well, but by the time, when you get to 240, her hair up on the upper left-hand side, it's just...
It's like stairs, yeah.
Yeah, it's just breaking up. It's really...
Having said that, the motion is amazing.
The motion is
so
amazing,
glamorous.
But can you use that at 240?
Yeah.
It's too slow for most applications anyway. 120 is almost too slow for some, but looks great. It really depends on the application.
It depends on what you're
doing.
doing.
It really does. So I guess they can't make that kind of a statement.
I will say most of the things that I've shot at 120 or 240 are like product-related things. And for those, you need higher resolution than this. So this 240 frames isn't going to kill your Phantom,
It's not going to put the Phantom out of business.
But in terms of just shooting casual things when you want to get that fun, I guess it's okay.
Yeah. This starts to feel to me like it goes to 11. It goes to 11.
It goes to 11.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, you can do 240 frames, but is it really an application that is practical or real usable in a professional situation? No, probably not.
You know, I'm going to say, now that you said that, that's almost kind of how I feel about the camera in general.
It goes to 11.
It goes to 11, you know, like it does the 240 frames and it does the high ISO, you know, low light and stuff, but does it knock it out of the park? Not totally for me, at least. It seems like a really decent camera all around for video, but then it doesn't have the IBIS. You know, it doesn't have the sensor stabilization.
That's a tough thing. So what you have is a high-end, more of a cinema type camera. It's very close to a cinema camera because the V-Log comes with it. You have you really have the high frame rates. You've got a really low light. You know, whereas when you get down to the GH5, that's more of your crossover camera. I do video and I take stills, you know, which does both of those. I wouldn't choose this as a still camera, although it's interesting. When you put this on a screen, and we had it on the screen inside, and blow these up side by side, it's pretty tough to tell the 10 megapixel versus 20.
They look very similar.
They do, you know, which sometimes I wonder if we get so hung up on megapixels and bigger and bigger and bigger that there's a point where you just don't see it. At least you don't see it in this world when you're looking at it on a monitor. And I'm not saying on the internet, I'm saying on our monitor. In the internet, you're definitely not going to see it.
That's for sure.
So the pros and cons of these two cameras.
I would say the pros of the GH5s is it has 1 to 1.5 stops better low light. And it comes with a V-Log without having to pay for it. It can do this high frame rate stuff, like 240 frames per second, 1080p. It can. I don't think it's super usable for almost anything. So I'm not going to really count that. But the low light is pretty great.
Well, the pros for the GH5 for me is the image stabilization is huge.
That's huge for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's a bigger megapixel sensor, so you're going to have a better still image, which is a better crossover camera for doing stills and video. And also, you can shoot 60 frames a second at 1080p on this camera.
Yeah,
no,
actually, you can shoot 60 and 4K.
Oh, 60 and 4K?
Both
so you can do
cameras,
120
and 1080.
Yeah. So you can do 120 in 1080p, 120 frames in 1080p here, which I'm not so thrilled with the 240.
Yeah, it's kind of like, does that kind of nullify?
It kind of does.
Good enough? Yeah.
Kind of does to me.
So what it really comes down to, and like a lot of other people have been saying, is do you need the one-stop extra low light performance, or do you need the image stabilization? I don't think that either cameras are really stellar at shooting photos. They're both pretty close. The GH5 probably has an edge, but what it really comes down to for me is low light versus image stabilization.
Well, if you were to take the still camera thing off the table, just say, okay, is this a great still camera? Probably not my first choice. There's other cameras out there I would choose. So now I'm going to get my best video camera from these two. If I'm doing run and gun, I would choose this camera because of the image stabilization. If I'm really controlling things, maybe I'm on a gimbal on a helicopter, maybe I'm on a gimbals and sliders, I would go with a better low light and just some of the features on the GH5s. So there's kind of the world. If you're run and gun versus really controlled kind of situations, there's how I would make my decision.
Yeah, though I guess the uncontrolled aspect of this is the light, you know. You buy it for the low light because you can't control the light. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Just depends on your needs, as always.
As always, as all these cameras do. So there you have it. A look at the GH5 and the GH5s. A shout out to Borrowed Lenses, who gave us the cameras and lenses so that we could test them for you today. Great company if you want to get some equipment, extra equipment to rent or try, or just kind of fill out what you're doing. So check out Borrowed Lenses. And check out all of our social medias, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Like us, love us, follow us, and we'll all be happy. So keep those cameras rolling.
And keep on cooking.
You'll want to check out our new stop motion download, 2.5 hours of tips and techniques from Trisha Zemp. You'll love the things she talks about, a tasty video, the B&H logo. Go to theslantedlens.com where you can download yours today. You should subscribe to The Slanted Lens. It may not save your life, but why risk it? Just push that button right there.